This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 132.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Good morning, Benny. How are you?
Good morning, Ramsey. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So you look like you just, well, you don't look like you just woke up. You told me that you just woke up, but you don't look it. So
that's very kind. That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me today. I appreciate that.
Today. Good. I was feeling worried. Like I felt like you need a little bit of love from your parents or something. How's everything been going, man?
Yeah, things have been all right. The job's been going well. COVID has kind of continued on. That's actually been a little bit challenging here in our hometown of Ottawa. We just re-entered so we got out of what we called phase 2, and then we looped back into phase 2.
Yeah.
And so that's been challenging. But besides that, I think things are relatively nice. Really starting to appreciate fall colors. They're looking quite nice outside just now. But,
yeah.
How about with you?
It's been good. Things are going nuts. So I don't know if I have announced it on this podcast, but my wife is pregnant with my third child, and her third child, it seems. Yeah, and things are busy. Let's just put it that way. It's fairly busy. The kids are going insane. We're virtual schooling our eldest, so wow. They're all home, and it's a challenge. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, and how old are your kids again?
One is turning 5 next month. One is 2.5, and the other one is like 6 months in the belly.
Wow.
So -4, I guess.
-4 months.
Yeah, it's exciting, and there's a lot of work to be done, but it is. Looking forward to it. It's just like at some point you just want the baby to come so you can,
right.
see her. It's a girl, by the way.
Ooh,
2 boys and a girl. So at least that's what the doctors told us. They said the same thing about the first one, though. So they were wrong.
No, that's super exciting. I feel like obviously they're all pretty young, and I'd imagine just a few years they'll all be kind of getting ready to be able to like do chores around the house around the same time, give or take, which will be
nice. Do what?
Just like chores and like help out around
chores.
The house. Around
I heard you torch the house. I heard you torch the house. I'm like, no, they're ready right now to torch the house. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. They don't come with a manual, that's for sure. So,
right.
Yeah.
But you can argue that I guess having the first few kids is kind of a proof of concept, I suppose, for some of the next ones coming out.
First few kids. How many kids do we expected us to have? Like 7? I think we're done.
No. True.
Speaking of proof of concepts, which was a really bad segue, Benny, I have to admit. Today's guest is Tony Matos, and he wrote the book on proof of concepts. The book. I haven't seen any other books about proof of concepts. So if you want to read about proof of concepts, check out Tony Matos' book. There's going to be a link in the show notes, wetheSalesEngineers.com/show 132. We're going to be talking about proof of concepts today, which is not something we've talked about on the show before, which is great.
Totally.
Do you do a lot of proof of concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. More so, I guess, at my old job, but still a little bit in this job too, kind of setting up trial environments to kind of replicate what their actual one would look like. It's been interesting. I never really put as much thought into them as I had, or rather, as I have learned to after listening to Tony's show, because there's quite a lot of nuance to it beyond just setting up an environment and throwing the keys over the fence. There's quite a bit to it to make it effective.
That's a recipe to lose the proof of concept.
Totally.
Right? Like if you don't prepare for it, if you don't know exactly what they want to do. I've had this issue where initially early on in my career, we just do that. We like the customer won't want to see something. We bring in the hardware, give it to them, and I'm here to support you. But we don't have a plan of what they want to test, what they want to see.
Right.
And that leads to just they want to see everything.
Right.
We finished the first part of the POC successfully, second part successfully. Now they want to test 3, 4, and 5, but like now we're going into like you're actually testing your equipment, right? You're actually using it as part of your day-to-day. That's no longer a POC. Right. And at some point they're going to find something that it doesn't work the way they want it to work, which in the end, you might still get the sale because they need the equipment, and we showed value in the first few, but it's not as quick of a sale, and they're gonna buy it like, oh my god, like it doesn't do that, but no product does everything.
Sure enough. And
So,
even
yeah.
like if you kind of think about how long it may take for you for come for myself, like starting into a relatively new job, how long it takes for somebody new to learn your own hardware, learn your own software that you're selling, and then you kind of like give something that could very well be capable of what a customer is looking for to a customer who's never used it before. They're pretty much in the dark. They have no idea how to use anything, and so
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. I'm in a different place where I have like customers. I've worked with them forever, right? I've been working with them for 6 years, so they know how to use my equipment, which makes you think it's easier to just pass it on and say, "Hey, go," right? It doesn't always work, and yeah, you always have to make sure you understand what the plan is. Anyways, Tony will discuss a little bit further, so let's just jump in. Good morning, Tony. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us. I would love to know a little bit more about you. So do you mind introducing yourselves to the folks listening?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me on. My name is Tony Matos, and I'm currently the Sales Engineering Director for Citrix Canada, so in the Toronto area.
Okay, so you cover the Toronto area, or you cover all of Canada?
Actually, I have a team that spans coast to coast, so I have a Western, Central, and Eastern team, and we cover the workspace solution products at Citrix. So,
yeah, you've been in pre-sales for a while. I'm kind of curious how you got in there in the first place and how you moved up the ranks.
Yeah, no, well, it seems like such a long time ago, but actually I was working as a IT analyst in a financial services company, which is now part of TD Canada Trust. But back then I was living in London and working in IT, enjoying it very much. But then I came across a great organization called Business Objects, which is now, I believe, part of SAP. And just through a series of relationships and curiosity, which I think is something very important for a sales engineer, I was able to actually move from about a 14-year career in IT as an analyst and programmer, actually. And I started at Business Objects, and then had some experiences at Siebel Systems, which is now Oracle, and spent the bulk of my pre-sales career at SAS Institute, which is the analytics company, and currently at Citrix. Yeah, so it's been a very interesting ride so far.
Okay.
Did you find pre-sales at all these different companies, were they very different from each other? Like, did each have their own unique way of going through things or culture, or were they all very similar?
Well, you know, the practices around pre-sales tended to be very similar. You know, there are certain things and habits and practices that I think are very fundamental to the pre-sales sales engineering role. But as you would appreciate, I mean, every company has a totally different culture, right? So every organization was sales oriented, but their processes and obviously the CRM systems that they use or even didn't use at times were different. And that always tended to influence sort of how the sales engineer team was engaged and how they were part of the team. Like, there's always some nuances. So the expectations were the same, but how we were called into deals and our roles was sometimes different, quite different at times. Yeah.
Fair, which makes sense, I suppose. As you said, they're kind of managed or dictated by the overall culture of the organization anyways. So
that's right.
That's fair.
So yeah, out of curiosity, is there a specific culture or is there a specific methodology when you get called in that you prefer over others?
In terms of how the sales engineering team is engaged?
Yeah. Like go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think every sales engineer wants to be very much a part of the sales team and the sales process, right? And so I guess if I were to be able to wave that magic wand and sort of have, the ultimate sales engineering team, I guess, or culture, I think what's been healthy and where sales engineers add the most value is when we're very much part of the sales strategy, right? And we are also very much aware of what the sales processes are. So we're not, to stereotype, we're not just the ones that do all the techie stuff, and we're not just the ones that do all the RFPs and POCs and demos, right? Yep. But when we really weave in ourselves with the sales strategy and our team, and we're actually concerned about, hey, is there a budget to this? What's the path to purchase and all that stuff? I think that's when the sales engineering role becomes a little bit more interesting and fun, because we're not sitting on the sidelines. We're really part of the overall process, because it's fun to win a deal, right? Would you all agree? Yeah. It's fun to win a deal. There's an adrenaline rush when you do it.
Yeah. So that's funny you should say that. I work with a pool of SEs, right? So I'm an SE lead for a few accounts, and then I have a bunch of SEs who work with us, like if I need to pull them into something. So I'm in a hybrid role, and whenever I close a deal and I send like my team, congratulations guys, we just closed the deal,
right?
A lot of times the response, like, I wish I had something to do with that, right? Like they feel like they weren't part of that as much as they actually are. They just come in, answer a few questions, and leave.
Right.
Yeah. So it's interesting you should say. I agree. Like from somebody else's perspective, I guess.
Yeah. Well, as sales engineers, we really do want to contribute, right? Yeah. We really do want our stamp on that we had an influence, or we actually, significantly helped a deal to close. So that's a sign of a really good SC, that they care about that.
Yeah, and it's not just like answering technical questions. It's actually being a part of the sales, like the whole process. Not just, hey, could you help me out, answer these technical questions, and I'll take care of the rest.
Exactly. Yeah. Keeps the role fresh and exciting for sure.
Yeah. Something about that point in particular, I was surprised to discover it, but it seems to be something that exists rather across a lot of different departments at companies. At the previous company that I was at not too long ago, I was talking to somebody over on the dev or on the engineering side, and I forget exactly how the conversation was going, but eventually got around to this idea of, let's say an engineer that's developing this really kick-ass feature, whatever it may be, they might not necessarily know the impact that they're having on the overall product or even on the company's sales themselves. And they were having that same issue as well around them not really getting too excited when deals close because they didn't really feel like they had an impact. But no, I mean, they're literally building up this product that in the end sales is able to sell. So it seems like they, like, not to say that a company should be entirely sales centric, but I think that if those lines were to be drawn a little bit more maybe broadly or defined better with respect to how every company or rather how every individual is really contributing to the growth of that company across any department, there'd be quite a few benefits to reap.
Yeah, no, I think it's important because, I know very few successful sales engineers who just want to just be on the sidelines, right? Like, I don't think they wake up wanting to say, oh, I hope something happens. They want to make something happen in a deal, right? They want to have an impact for sure.
Sure. So I want to transition to the reason you are here. And the reason you are here is you just wrote a book.
I did, yes.
Do you mind telling us about that book?
Yeah, so the book is called The Essential Guide to Navigate Your Proof of Concept. And so it's about the mindset, I'd say a little bit of the philosophy, really a big focus on what the best practices are for conducting what I've termed a world-class proof of concept. Okay.
So can we define proof of concept for those who aren't usually part of that?
Yeah. I mean, in the sales engineering role, there are lots of practices and disciplines we have. There's answering the requests for proposals and information. There's obviously the demos and discoveries that we do. But there are times when customers want to experience or actually see a solution actually illustrated or at play in their environment. And so that's typically called a proof of concept. Some organizations call it a proof of value. I don't think that there's enough sort of distinction between value and proof, depending if you have a methodology around it. So I tend to go with the term proof of concept. And so a proof of concept is fundamentally allowing a customer to experience a solution around a set of success criteria with a certain business context. It's done in a very defined period of time. It isn't something that typically goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks, typically for most solutions anyway. And then the purpose of it is for a customer to have their questions answered, to sort of test some points of view, or actually test very specific integrations. And the purpose of a proof of concept is so that it makes it easier for a customer to determine which solution best suits their needs.
So throughout my life, I think I've started maybe 7 books and never finished one.
Okay.
How was your experience writing a book? Like, did you enjoy it? How were you able to finish it?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote this during this year, which is 2020, and obviously the pandemic, right? So, and the reason I mentioned that is I think I used the book as a way of also, I guess, coping or getting through, a difficult period of time. And I guess part of it was I just realized that sometimes you just got to buckle down and do the hard work. So I found it very hard to write the book myself. As you can imagine, I'm writing a book to an audience that's very skilled, very adept. And so you've always got in the back of your mind, did I get it right? Did I say all the right things? Is there too much in there? Is there too little? There's probably 4 or 5 other books that could get written on this topic, right? And maybe that was the other reason, if I could just say, is I'm hoping that people, at least in my network who know about me, would sort of look at this and say, you know what, we need to write more materials for the sales engineering profession. I really don't think that there's enough quality. It's not about quality. There isn't enough quantity out there in terms of materials and training for our profession. So that was 2 motivations: getting through 2020 with a project, and hopefully encouraging others to sort of join in and start doing some more writing.
It's funny you to say that. I feel like Benny and I, every time we say something like as a fact, and in the back of my mind, there's like, well, this applies to me. Will it apply to the people
Right.
who are going to listen to this? Will it apply to people who, yeah. So I get what you're saying. But did you make the decision to write the book before 2020, or was it, 2020 is going to, well, wherever, let's just write the book so I can feel better?
No, actually, the idea for the book actually started, I would say, mid 2018. And, so you start to sketch down some ideas and you start to think about it and talk to people in your network. And just because I started a new role in 2018, I just had to focus on that. So anyway, the end of 2019 rolled around, and 2020, January 2020, and I started it then. And then, March hit and everything came around, and I thought, no, it's just the time that I've just got to use to just get this down. If I don't do it now, it may never get done.
Fair. And so back in 2018, was there a trigger event that kind of got you to really, I don't know, start more seriously thinking about getting this all on paper?
Yeah, I mean, this whole topic has always sort of come about. I mean, I would say that the first thing that really sparked my interest was actually when I started off in sales engineering. There wasn't a lot written about how to do the role back then, let alone how to conduct a proof of concept. So actually, a lot of the book came from my mistakes. So you do something and it doesn't work out, and there's always a bit of pain associated with that when something doesn't work out the way you want. So you start to ask the question, well, why did that go wrong? And, the next best question you can ask is, well, how could you improve upon it so that it doesn't happen as much or at all. And so really throughout my career, for whatever reason, proof of concepts have always sort of been sort of an integral part of the solutions that and the organizations that I've been a part of. And so it's always been something that I've been refining. And you find after a period of time, it's like, oh, I've got some ideas and approaches and things that tend to work better than not doing them, right? So it really came from a lot of my mistakes and just not wanting to repeat them.
Okay. Oh, that's admirable.
Yeah.
It's so true too, at least in this profession. If I could even just excluding resources that other people have written or put out there, if I were just to go back in time to, I don't know, like first year SCME, I haven't been in it for that long, but like just a short period of time that anybody ever does anything, it's crazy how much you could learn. So after all the experiences that you had, that's amazing to eventually get that down for sure.
Yeah, you have to learn from things that don't quite go the way you want, for sure.
Totally.
So about the proof of concept, I've, due to the weirdness of my role being a hybrid SE, I've been on calls with other salespeople. I've been on calls with other SEs, and I personally always cringe whenever I hear the SE or the salesperson say, "I can give you some licenses and you can try it out." Right?
Yeah.
When is a proof of concept appropriate initially?
Yeah, I mean that's something that I wrestled with a lot in the book, right? It isn't always as much as clear. There isn't as much clarity as you always want. And what I had to discover and work through when I was writing the book is, I remember at one point in an early manuscript, I had a list of about 10 things, and they were sort of indicators of, well, if these things are in place, then you should go with a POC. And what I found was when I tried to apply them to my team, right, they weren't always working out. So I thought, okay, well, what's wrong here? What's not working and it needs improvement. And so what I discovered is an SC will know deep in their heart if a proof of concept's required, if they've really spent a lot of time qualifying the POC, right? And this is really the hard work that has to be done, because I know my inclination when I got asked for a POC was to say yes, because it's like, man, I was fired up about my solution. I know I could crush the competition. And although that's a great inclination and emotion you really have to fight that as a sales engineer to really step back and say, okay, I believe firmly that I can beat the competition. But the hard work is to actually ask a lot of questions, right? Yep. Of the customer. And so that's really one of the what I call the milestones in a methodology that I lay out, and that is qualify. And qualifying is hard because you have to ask a lot of questions of yourself, your team, but of the customer as well, as to, well, why is it that you need to invest time with us to see this solution, right? There's actually the need that they have, or the request that they have around the POC doesn't always come out, and you really have to understand the need that they have behind the question. So the request is, hey, can you do a POC? Well, the easy answer is yes, but the hard part is actually going through a discovery where you discover what the real need is and what the politics and the processes and the decision processes are around them acquiring a solution.
How do you, I've had a bit of failure with POCs early in my career, mainly because of, oh, you want to try it? Sure thing. Let me order a hunking piece of equipment, bring it into your lab, try it out. Oh, it doesn't work at all because you wanted to do something else.
Right.
So I felt at one point I may have taken it to the other extreme of asking a lot of questions. How do you balance not giving in right away and then asking enough questions, but not too much to piss off the customer at the same time?
Yeah, no, it's something you have to watch out for, right? I mean, part of this is it really depends on how new that customer is to you, right? If they're a customer that you've done business with before and it's some sort of expansion, or it's a different, might be the same company but a different department, and you've got relationships you can leverage, right? You've got some currency that you can burn with that customer to sort of say, hey, you know what, I've got my own processes in play here, right? I've got responsibilities to ensure that the time and the resources that we have in this organization, that, you know, this is where I need to invest them. So the word that I use a lot is diplomacy. You got to be really crisp in how you communicate this, because you have to build a relationship with a customer to allow a series of questions to occur, right? Because you don't want them to, you know, get ticked off and then, you know, throw their focus to a competitor. So you do have to have the ability to build a relationship and to be authentically curious about what's going on. You know, one of the things that I always did was I never wanted to go in and assume that I knew a customer's business. I might know about their industry, but what they're going through, even within an industry, could be very different from company to company, right? And so I always sought to just sit down and say, hey, can you just tell me about what's going on, right? And just be authentically curious about their situation, about what their team's going through, about the pressures that are coming from their executives down, right? Because all of these things that come upon a team, they influence why POCs are requested, right? There's always a bigger story, as it were.
Such an interesting point, this whole idea of kind of understanding the lay of the land of the organization that you're giving a POC to, really understand how to navigate it most effectively. So that's kind of maybe answers the next question I was going to ask you, but maybe there's some others as well. Are there any other aspects, or are there any aspects about POCs that SEs may not think to be as important as they actually end up being, or some areas of thought that, I don't know, they wouldn't even think about, such as, you know, as you just described, the company?
Yeah, you know, again, I'll go back to, you know, my own experiences, right? And I would say that one of the things that, you know, got me in a lot of trouble was, and I'm going to say this carefully, was just being focused on the technology capabilities of whatever the solution was that I was, you know, representing at that time, right? And so the reason I say it like that is, to your question, I think one of the things that you have to be really careful of within the context of a proof of concept is, you know, sales engineers are motivated and incented to be that technical conscience, to actually know the solution really, really well. And in a proof of concept, I know when I was asked about, hey, Tony, can you do a proof of concept? I was already running through my mind, you know, how I was going to set it up and what was going to happen. And, you know, some of those crucial success criteria that would allow our solution to stand up. And so, but what I realized is that as often as the solutions were, and they were great organizations that I've worked for and currently work for, right? If I didn't consider the business processes and the business climate that the customer is asking me about doing a POC, I might lose an understanding or fail to see some very important things. So there's, you know, like what's changed in their business processes or business climate that's requiring an enhanced or net new solution, right? So, you know, often I could go check, we can do that, but why and what's occurred that that they need to invest time in actually looking at something and hopefully buying something as well. So understanding that business context is really, really important, because I think you'd agree, once you understand that, you might have some things that you thought you might need to illustrate, but you may not need to illustrate them, or it could be a totally different set because of what's going on in the business context, or maybe the organization's changing, maybe they're acquiring someone, right, and so on, and they're going to need a whole new sales process or a whole whack of different technology to enable it. So business context, I think, is something we need to focus on, because sales engineers are really, really good at the technology part. We need to focus more on the business process that's influencing this.
So I completely agree, especially as so many decision makers or key decision makers in the end up being those business people, or rather the decisions themselves tend to be on the business oriented problems. And so as an SE, if you're able to speak directly to that, but by truly understanding it, I couldn't agree more. That would be super effective.
Yeah.
Obviously a great compliment to the great technical knowledge that we
one of the notes that I took during our previous chat was the idea, like you mentioned, the idea of POC as purchase order coming. So
yeah,
could you explain that a little bit and how that affects the SE specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've just been talking about, sort of the first, at the beginning life cycle of the POC in terms of the qualification, right?
Yep.
So you qualify really well. You define the POC in terms of putting it into a nice document that's sort of shared with the customer. It's a collaborative document. That's really important. And then you get down to the actual execution of the proof of concept. And, again, going back to my, early experiences, right, of doing POCs, I was fortunate. I would often get, as it were, the technical win. So the POC went well, and check, the solution came out on top, or it ranked really, really high. But what I noticed was, as a sales engineer, we sort of just stopped at that point, right? And what I've come to realize and actually see when I've observed other proof of concepts across, a few organizations, was there's a handoff that has to be made from that point where the sales engineer completes the proof of concept, and they rank really, really high, or they actually get the technical win. And there's a very important handoff. And the handoff is how do you close the POC properly, right? And what I noticed was that there isn't a clean handoff between the sales engineer and what I call the sales team, or the account rep, or sales rep, and so on. And so I think it's really, really important for the sales engineer to be doing everything possible to find that evidence about what went well in the POC, so that they work towards what I call the POC key findings meeting, which is taking all of the technical elegance and great stuff that's happened during the POC and translating that into what's the business impact, right? How does this change a customer's organization or processes, or enable that business change that really sort of set up the POC in the first place? And so one of the things that's really, really important is a sales engineer should be working to find evidence and success stories and comments that really, really lock in their solution as being the best possible solution to address the requirement that started off the POC in the first place.
So speaking of that, like SE does the POC, we do the debrief with the account team. This is what went great. This is how we could affect their business. What is the role of the sales engineer after that with regards to this opportunity?
Yeah, well, actually the role is they're still part of that whole close section, or milestone, as I call it, right? And what they're really doing is ensuring that the sales team has all the ammunition and information to take the technical elegance of what they did and translate it into a sale, right? And so, you've got a POC going on, it goes well. What you want to do sort of in the next phase is actually tell the story of the proof of concept, not from a technical perspective, but tell it from a business perspective. So tell the story of how the solution actually enables users, how it allows them to increase their capacity for sales, or increase their capacity on their network and so on. And so I think a sales engineer has to stay really, really close to their sales rep in order to ensure that they're telling a great story, right? And the great story is a solution that they have and how it really addresses the issues that the customer has, not from solely a technical perspective, but from a business and business process.
Fair. And would you say that same type of maybe follow-up and involvement that an SE has in the post-POC experience for a prospect, does that happen in the same way or differently to organizations that have maybe a one SE to a many AE type of dynamic, as opposed to having a one-to-one relationship between SEs and AEs?
Yeah, I think wow, that's interesting. You know, I think it becomes a little bit harder when you have, you know, more SCs that are contributing to that overall POC experience or the sale. So it definitely requires a little bit more coordination, right? Now, in your situation, would you typically have, as it were, a lead SC, or is this more of a pooled situation where people come in and out depending on domain specialties and such?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The place I've only really been an SC at two places, one of which I was the only SC for a while, and then even when we did a couple more people, typically we tried to keep the SC consistent across deals, but sometimes there'd be some overlap. So I haven't really had to deal with the pool per se as much. And then now with the new place, I kind of have my own lane as well. So so it's not really as I guess as much of an issue for me, but I'd imagine when a whole bunch of different SCs are coming onto the same deal, yeah, that'd be super challenging.
I can talk from my experience. We have a pool of SEs, and there's also like specialist SEs behind them. Generally, so that's where multiple SEs get involved. But generally, the account SE is the lead, and it's their job to make sure that the account is happy, and they bring in the other person as needed. So there should be always at least one point of contact, a lead SE, whether their position is lead SE or not, but for every opportunity, there should be a lead SE working on that opportunity, in my opinion.
No, that's been my experience. I've worked with organizations where there's, you know, a pool and, you know, a series of specialists, and also where there's a direct mapping. Yeah. But even in a direct mapping where it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or whatever it happens to be, right, there's always other specialists and people that you draw into a POC for very specific reasons. Yeah. You know, so having that lead, as it were, is very important, because they really need to orchestrate and sort of be the glue between all of these people, because otherwise you're gonna miss something really important that isn't captured or understood when you sort of bring this to a close. So, you know, the reason I termed it's a purchase order coming is the other reason was I don't think you should do a POC with a view for just a nice research project on behalf of the customer, or to like I've seen POCs used to teach or educate customers, and I don't tend to lean that way. I'm not going to say absolutely no, but I wouldn't use a POC to necessarily teach or educate a customer about a solution. I think that's a big investment you're making.
I feel like we barely scratched the surface of talking about proof of concept. So if anyone wants to learn more, you should pick up Tony's book. But the last question I have before we move on to the not so fire round is, you mentioned that the best POC is not having a POC, skipping it altogether. How can we skip a POC when a customer is asking for it? Or is there situations where we can skip POCs?
Yeah, again, a lot of diplomacy needed here. I actually think that sometimes a customer will ask for a proof of concept. Even though they use the term, they may not necessarily be asking for the engagement that we're talking about, right? Yeah. I think we've all experienced as tenured SCs that sometimes the words come out of our mouth too quickly, right? And we think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that as quickly, or maybe one of your sales counterparts offers it too quickly. So there are situations when the request is made. And you know what I go back to once again is you got to understand the reason why someone is asking that of you. It could just be, that's just all they know, or they just tend to do it. Often in the absence of having another really good alternative or approach to something, we'll default to what's comfortable. And in this case, it's quite reasonable and common and not unexpected that customers will ask for proof of concept. Some of the ways that I've tended to bypass proof of concepts is, again, asking the customer what they want to see, actually illustrating it through very specific or targeted demonstrations. Sometimes that's just enough for a customer to sort of get them over the line. If not, even if all of those sort of pointed demonstrations, or sometimes talking to another customer or a really good success story that's out in the marketplace that's well known from a great logo of someone who's experienced the same problem. Even if all of those things are simply used to just reduce the list of things that a customer believes they need to see at a POC, and that list gets really, really short. And then if that list becomes short, even if I go into a proof of concept, I'm maybe showing 2 things versus 17 things, right? And so the ability for the POC to be very focused, very short, is also a really important element, right? Because you want to keep a tight focus on what you have to do during the proof of concept.
And speaking of a list of things, the point of the proof of concept, is it to show them how they're going to use it every day in their lives, or just like some focused aspects of it that they have concerns about?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I think where a lot of proof of concepts go sort of off-road and get into a little bit of trouble is because you don't have that sort of circle or fence around it, right? So no, a proof of concept should be very much about illustration and not implementation, right? So you don't want to use a proof of concept to implement a solution, because implementing a solution in production environment, especially in today's climate, is complex, right? We've got a lot of great software and hardware solutions out in place, but there's a lot of integration that has to happen to make them come to life, and security and all of the things that go about it. And so I tend to say a proof of concept is always about illustrating the possibility of something. Now, in a proof of concept, there might be a very specific thing or process or workflow or integration they want to see, and that's all fine. But even that list, it has to be a list of 3 things, not a list of 30 things, as I tend to say. So illustration, not implementation, for sure.
Okay. Well, again, I have a million other questions, and I'm definitely going to get the book and go through it. But it is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions we ask almost every guest.
Sure.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Usually Benny starts us off.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you've defined yourself as a leader over the course of your career. And so the first question is, what do you love about sales engineering or pre-sales leadership?
Oh, about pre-sales in general, or pre-sales leadership, or both?
You can do both if you. Let's do both.
Well, okay. So what I love about pre-sales or sales engineering is I just love the fact that we have to know a solution really well, and I think there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from investing yourself with a great organization to know a solution well. I get a great sense of satisfaction for people sort of being able to call me up and have a sense of confidence and bring me into part of a thing that needs to be solved, right? So I think most sales engineers are oriented that way, where they want to contribute, they want to solve something, and they want to see an outcome of that, right? And the outcome that we always love is we love to get that win. I think sales engineering is just a great profession because it requires so many disciplines to come into play. There's, the technical disciplines across so many software solutions and and hardware vendors these days, right? And just the wealth of things that you can learn and enrich yourself with is really good. But it also requires a lot of soft skills, right? You've got to learn how to communicate, how to deal with difficult situations. And so I really think that it's a role that sort of requires a lot of disciplines, and it really requires you to keep on improving yourself and learning. And so that sort of fires me up, right? It's not a career where you can sort of learn something once and you don't have to ever learn it again, right? And so it's great from that perspective.
Very true. No, I couldn't agree more. And would you also say that the same quality kind of pertains to the leadership piece as well, to always kind of be learning and iterating and developing on oneself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for those of you listening who have made the transition from being that individual contributor where you're really having to contribute, to a team, right? You recognize that basically your education starts all over again, right? Because your focus is different. Sort of your list of priorities changes significantly. Like anyone in an organization is sales oriented, of course, right? But definitely from having to, I was going to say manage people. It's really, I think, about caring for people. That takes on a different perspective, right? And so as much as we're all focused on winning deals, you also have to work really, really hard on building up your team. So how is your team doing from a technical and skills perspective, right? How are they doing from, those soft skills, and how, do they know how to manage conflict? Because we do get conflict or difficult conversations that have to happen in our role, whether it's internal to the team or to the customer. And so, yeah, it's very much a caring role, I think, as a manager, right? Caring for sales, but also caring for people and their health and well-being.
Very true.
Well, there's another podcast episode with you about leadership, so stay tuned for that. What would you change about SEs or sales engineering leaderships, or about your role?
Well, let me just start off with just generally what I would change about sales engineering. And I don't believe that what I'm going to say is original or new, right? But I think that one of the things that I've seen in sales engineering over the years, and what I continue to get, what I continue to hear about is the following. I think we need, as sales engineers, to look at the title of sales engineer and say, what's that first word in that title? There's two words, one's sales and one's engineering. I think that we've focused a lot, and rightfully so, on the engineering, or what I'll call the technical aspects of our role, right? I think with the changing landscape of what's happening, and not just in 2020, but just in general, that I think we need to put a little bit more focus on the sales side of our title. And so, I'll go back to, something that I learned from one of my sales managers, and, it's that simple acronym band. So budget, access, need, and timing, right? And just all the common sense and sort of right sales processes. We need to know those processes as well as our sales counterparts are measured on them. So that's my first comment there.
Okay.
And so the way to put it in context is, I've always sort of looked at my role from the things that I'm accountable for versus the thing that I should have awareness of, right? So from a sales engineer perspective, there are many things that we're accountable for, right? Our technical competence, our ability to rightly express our solution, so that a customer says, yeah, that's the one I want, right? And so all the sales engineering stuff, right? I put it in, you got to be accountable for that. Like, to be a sales engineer, you have to know how to do demos. You have to know how to do proof of concepts and RFPs and discovery. and all those things, right? But when I talk about this sales aspect, I put that in the category of awareness. There's lots of things I can be aware of, right? But I'm not necessarily accountable for. So for example, do I have to be accountable for the fact that there being a budget and an opportunity? Well, no. Thankfully, I've got great sales counterparts who are accountable for that, right?
Yep.
But as a sales engineer, I should be aware if there's budget, because if there's not budget, that's a flag. And I know that's a very simple example. So yeah, being accountable and being aware are two different things, but they sort of live very much side by side with each other.
Yeah, which is, even though it's a simple example, a lot of SEs I know try to avoid knowing about budget. Like, oh, it's not my job. I don't want to talk about money. I'm afraid of talking about money. So no, it's a very good point.
Well, you don't have to ask the question necessarily to the customer, but you should be able to have a healthy conversation with your sales rep to say, do we know about budget yet? Oh, we don't. Okay, well, that's all right.
Yeah.
You know, let's find out, because that's going to influence your, like, not yours, our path and how we approach this, right?
Yeah.
And this goes down to, you know, sales strategy, right? We should know the sales strategy really well with our sales rep. Yeah.
I have asked, as an SE, I've asked about budget, mainly when I felt like there's something off, like they're asking for the world, right? And then like my sales guy, I don't know, he's thinking about something else. So I end up like asking him, all right, so you want all this. I am curious, like I need to fit it within a budget. What is the budget that I'm trying to work with here? So I've asked that question, and it's like $5K, but you're asking for $1 million worth of equipment. Like, that would have been nice to know before we even came into this meeting, right? During the qualification process. But yeah, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, no, it comes down to those, you know, important conversations you have to have as a team, right? And yeah, they're difficult conversations to have even inside a team, because when those things get surfaced, right, there's just things that have to get resolved around it.
I also feel like sometimes SEs or salespeople take for granted that customers don't know all about us. So like we think, oh, they're asking for the world, they must know it's expensive, right? They must know. So we forget to ask that question, and then when we ask, we're like, what? Like, there's no way. But yeah.
No, it happens a lot, right? You're right. And I think that's the part that I think that sales engineers can really play. If nothing else, having very collaborative discussions with their sales counterpart. One of the other, I think we always have moments in our life and career that are sort of, defining and sort of, give us a good turn in how things go, right? And I remember one time I was challenged by the account executive that I was working with, right? And what they simply said is, Tony, I can't, they made this statement, Tony, I can't possibly think of everything. It's okay for you to be proactive. It's okay for you to challenge me. It's okay for you to think of something, don't always leave it up to me. And this is coming from an account executive who is really skilled and really successful in their career, right? And so it's this, working with and beside someone sort of mentality that says, hey, I know this sales rep is always, responsible for all these sales things, but man, how can I help them, right? How can we think through these things together? Because you win a deal together, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? Once they appreciate that you care about their stuff, as it were, maybe they'll care a little bit about why you're a little bit hesitant to put a proof of concept so quickly on the table, and sort of appreciating what goes with it. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes perfect sense. And the best relationships I've had with account managers are those who challenge me and allow me to challenge them.
Yeah, that's healthy.
I've been in relationships with account managers who don't like to be challenged at all. And that didn't work out very well. But those who ask my feedback and, and challenge me, like, because, I like to think that I'm perfect. My mom thinks that I'm perfect. So
I have a mom like that too.
Yeah. So it's not always true. All right.
Yeah.
Moving on. That's why it's called the not so fire round, because we keep asking questions. Go ahead, Betty.
Cool. Well, all of that still is really good information shared. And throughout the conversation as well, there's a lot of great insights, some of which I'm sure you explore a lot deeper in your book, The Essential Guide to Navigate Your Proof of Concept, which we'll have a link to in the notes. What are some other books, tools, or resources that you'd recommend for anybody who's looking into pre-sales or even say pre-sales leadership?
Yeah, I mean, one of the books that was quite influential to me when I first started my sales engineering career, I wish it was out earlier, but it was Mastering Technical Sales by John Kerr.
Yep.
So, and the reason that book was so influential was, I didn't get into sort of, how I bumped into sales engineering from being in IT, right? But man, if we had time and I told you about that first demo, I mean, I wish it was recorded because it should be on YouTube for all the things that you shouldn't do in sort of that first meeting and demo, right?
Yeah.
So, that book was really highly influential to me. I think the other one, just because it's so integral to the role of a sales engineer, is how does one do demonstrations? And so Peter Cohen has got an excellent book out called Great Demo. And then, from that, I go down to a whole series of leadership books. I'm a big fan of John Maxwell in terms of just leadership and, how is it that I conduct myself, whether, it's at home or in my community or in the, the corporation that I work with, and am I bringing the best version of myself to the table that's contributing, to the company, right? And so on. So, but from a sales engineering perspective, those two books were highly influential in forming
Going
my
back
career.
to the leadership, I'm checking out John Maxwell. I actually never heard of him, but I'm assuming he has more than one book.
He does, yeah. He's probably got probably 50 books. I've lost track. I'm looking in my my library here. I don't have all of them, but Leadership 2.0 is one of his more recent books, and that's a very influential book in my life.
Okay, so if people were to start with one book, they would choose Leadership 2.0.
Exactly, yeah, that'd be a great start.
All right, cool. All right, the last question of the day, what separates great sales engineers from the okay or not so great ones?
Oh, wow. I assume that if you're a sales engineer, you've sort of got that big box of you're technically competent, your solution down, right? Like, I just think that's the entry point. And I know, people listening on this podcast, you might just be starting, you might have 5 years in, or maybe, 15 plus years in, right? So I just assume that you've sort of got that technology box and you can express and illustrate and demonstrate your solution well. I think what really separates sales engineers from one another is something that I think we've been talking about throughout this podcast, and that is two things: curiosity and collaboration. I think curiosity, whether it's inside your team about, well, how is the deal going to be structured, right? Do we have that budget in place, or how much budget we have, right? So being curious about things internally, but also even more important is just being curious with a customer. So most sales engineers, myself included, are curious about the technical aspects of what we will solve, right? But what about being curious about, for lack of another word, the politics that's going on in an organization, or what's driving change, or what changes are occurring within a team or an industry. And I think showing curiosity, especially to a customer, shows a level of respect that you care about things other than just the technology thing that you're going to solve, right? Being curious about, hey, let's say you select a solution, ours, of course, right? Because we got the best solution. But let's say you implement it. How's that going to impact your role? Yep. Is somebody going to get promoted? Is the team going to get bigger? Is the team going to get smaller? Sometimes solutions actually displace people or move them around, right? So curiosity, I think, is a great thing. And then the other one is collaboration. There's nothing better than sort of checking your ego at the door and just deciding just to work sometimes with difficult people. I've worked with, well, first of all, I'm a difficult person to work with. So let me just start with me, right? But sometimes you work with people that have differing perspectives. Sometimes people don't share as much as you want, right? And so I think as a sales engineer, to sort of overcome these situations, again, whether it's internal to the team or even more difficult with a customer where there's a lack of information or sometimes even a hesitancy to work with certain vendors, doing everything you can to be collaborative, to try and seek to understand people, I think are great skills to have, because I think what that does is it opens up the possibility to things you never considered, and you learn through being curious and collaborative.
Nice. Well, all right. Well, this brings us to the end of the session. Before we go, if people want to connect with you or they want to buy their book, your book, where can they do that?
Well, you can get the book on Amazon. It's available in many different regions. So whether that's .ca.com and about 11 or 12 other sites, the book is available on Amazon, both in Kindle and print form. And then I've also started a new website called POCessentials.com. And I'm sure we'll get that in the show notes as well. Yep. And they can get access to the book there, as well as some articles on proof of concepts and also just sales engineering practices as well. Nice. POCessentials.com.
All right. Yeah, we'll have the link to the book and to POC Essentials on the show notes. This is show 132. Thanks a lot, Tony. I appreciate your time. This was great.
Oh, this was great fun. So appreciated being on the show. And just a shout out to both of you for putting out a great podcast and having such a diversity of topics and people. It's just great to have this sort of content. I talked about how important it is for people to write, but it's really important to have this podcast and others just to continue to promote the great profession that is sales engineering. So great work, gentlemen.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
And this brings us to the end of this session. Thanks a lot, Tony, for being on. This was great. I love talking to Tony, fellow Canadian. Like, not many of us on the podcast, right? So
very true.
Yeah, how many Canadians have we had on the podcast?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't think two. I mean, probably a few for sure, but I feel like not as many as I would originally think.
Yeah,
at least two every time though, so that's good.
Yeah, I guess we are Canadians. You're right.
No, but that's a good point. I don't know.
Initially, early on, when I started the podcast, I reached out to my friends who were also Canadians. So my first podcast was with my former manager out of Indiana. The second two or three or four, I don't know, can't remember, were Canadians. And because they're my friends, and it's easier to talk to your friends when you're starting this off. And then I started telling people like, hey, I have a podcast. Do you want to join in? So people from the US and Europe have been joining a little bit more. So, or yeah, proportion. I can't even speak. There's a lot more Americans than Canadians on the show.
Fair enough.
There's a lot more people in the US too. So makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we went down a weird rabbit hole. So thanks again, Tony, for being on. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I say this almost as much as every time I remember to say it. So please leave a rating and review. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like it and subscribe. It helps the algorithm, or so I hear other YouTubers say. So
ring that bell too, whatever that does.
Ring that bell, comment below. I don't know what they say. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to become a YouTuber, whatever that means. So yeah, leave a rating and review. Share it with somebody you think this will be useful. If you worked with someone who, in the middle of a call with a customer, just says, "Oh, let's give you some licenses to try it out," send them this podcast, because I'm going to send it to a few people as well. All right. Any last words, Benny?
Yeah, well, I just want to say, like, one big takeaway from the show there that I thought was really, I guess that really hit hard, was the idea of a proof of concept, or POC, also standing for purchase order coming. Like, What a cool little way of looking at it. Because you're right. Like, you're pretty much right at the point where they have been impressed with everything that you've shown and told them so far, and now they just want to get their hands dirty with it before they actually do so as a customer. And so you should pretty much treat them as a customer at that point, and hopefully that means you treat them well to kind of bring them over the line, because that purchase order is coming.
But on that note, we talked to someone, so his episode will come out later, who is a customer.
Right.
And he says he loves Pox because he gets to play around for free or use the system for free in his environment. So it doesn't always mean purchase order coming. It just means like, oh, free stuff.
Fair enough. That's a good point. It's a good point.
So that's why you need a POC plan and all that ahead of time, and a commitment from the customer. Anyways, I think we'll end it here. So that was good. Thanks, Benny, for coming on. It's always good to see you. It's getting harder and harder to see you with the beard. This is Ramsey for Benny the Beard signing off.